Hi, everyone, and welcome to Me, You, and Who. Today's episode dives into the fascinating world of assisted reproductive technology law with a special focus on surrogacy. I'm joined by Marla Neufeld, an experienced art attorney and former intended parent. Today, we discuss the legal intricacies of surrogacy, particularly in Florida, while uncovering how Marla's personal experiences have shaped her professional approach. Get ready for a conversation packed with insights on common surrogacy myths, financial considerations, emotional hurdles, and the importance of communication and legal guidance throughout this unique and special journey. It was a wonderful episode and full of all kinds of information, so please enjoy. Me, you, and who? Who knew it would take more than two people to have a baby? In a world where infertility is no longer a taboo topic, this podcast will take you through all of the different aspects of surrogacy and egg donation through the lens of many who walk this journey in different ways. My name is Whitney Hall, and I am a two-time surrogate, now turned surrogacy coordinator for Egg Donor and Surrogate Solutions, the very agency I used when I chose to carry for two amazing families. With this podcast, it is our goal to help guide and support you as you learn about what it takes to grow a family in an alternative way, as well as hear inspiring and beautiful stories of how this path has changed lives forever. We can't wait for you to hear about just one more way happy families are created every day. Hi, Marla. I am so glad you're here.
Whitney, it's so great to see you. We've worked together for so many years and we've never really met face to face, even virtually. So this is awesome.
Exactly. It's so fun.
Yeah.
It's so fun.
Absolutely.
Well, I am just so excited because we have worked together and I, just one professional to another within this industry. It's always fun to chat and speak and, just learn about more than just, those fun exchanging of emails. So
Yes.
yes, you are how we work together is you are an art attorney. What for, kind of the listener, what does that mean? And how did you even get into such a niche practice?
Yes. So ART is an acronym for Assisted Reproductive Technology. I am an art attorney licensed in the state of Florida. And how I got into this area of law is I'm actually a former intended parent. So I have twin 10-year-old boys that
You're
I
in the
had.
thick of it, mama.
Yeah, exactly. And so, they were brought to me through the assistance of a gestational surrogate. So while actually my surrogate was pregnant, I started going to conferences and learning as much as I could. And what's unique about me, I guess, is I work at a very large, like 300-person law firm.
Yeah.
And so I basically approached the partners of the firm to start this practice area at my firm, Greenspoon Martyr. So I handle all the assisted reproductive technology legal work at Greenspoon. And it was amazing. They were so supportive to allow me to start the practice group there. And I'm just so grateful for what I went through and that I can do this professionally now. So that's what brings me to this world.
Oh my gosh. How do you, I mean, that personal experience alone, I know I know can be so helpful when going through, whatever part of this industry, but how do you feel like your own personal experience of being kind of on that, part of that process, how has that, kind of shaped how you practice in, in art law?
I mean, I think one of the main things is having been a former intended parent and just having gone through my own years of infertility. It's just kind of like that horrible feeling of always waiting. You're always waiting for the next period or the doctor's appointment. So I know that when somebody going through this process is at the legal stage, they've waited a long time already. So what I always aim to do while maintaining like good decor and, professionalism is I try to do things so that they're not waiting for me. And so I always try to move things forward as quickly as possible and not delay because I know like it's just painful to have to keep waiting and, hopefully never miss a cycle because of legal delays. So I always try and keep that in mind. I think that's a big thing that I learned from my own experience that I bring to the table, setting aside just understanding what it's like to be in an intended parent's shoes and not that I was a surrogate, but I can appreciate what mine went through. So I always try to keep
Yeah.
everything in mind of what I went through.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, I always love to say, we definitely we want to move as fast as we can, but we've got to dot those I's and cross those T's.
Absolutely. Yes, for sure. But I always try to make it a priority. I always try to get back to people same day, like things like that, so that we're not like sitting
Yes.
on something too long and missing time in the cycle.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And that communication just in any part of the process is so key. And then especially with legal, that's always so helpful and wonderful.
I mean, I really feel like communication through the whole process is one of the biggest, like most important things, and where I see the most issues, which we can talk about more as we go through the podcast, but just communication between all the parties really makes the process so smooth. I find that's an important part of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, okay, you mentioned, you're in Florida.
Yes.
What would you say are maybe some of the unique things that, are part of being in art law in Florida versus, just other states in the country?
Sure. One of the first unique parts to our surrogacy statute in Florida is that we have a medical need requirement within our surrogacy statute. So while
Hmm.
it's always kind of like a best practice that clinics follow, that there should be some medical basis for proceeding with a surrogate, we actually have it as part of a legal requirement. So the clinic will have to make a determination that the intended parents either cannot gestate to term or pregnancy would be a risk to the mother or the fetus. So it's a
Got
very
it.
broad standard. There's no specific examples of what need to be in any of those three categories, but
Hmm.
we always do have to have some form of, a basis of like a medical requirement. So that's something to think about with Florida.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we have a legal path to parenthood in Florida for any type of intended parent. You
Okay.
can be married, single, not married. You can also use donor egg, donor sperm, or a fully donated embryo. What you
Hmm.
have to keep in mind in Florida is you do have to proceed under different subsections of our law. If you're married using one of the parents' genetics, you handle the process under our surrogacy statute. If
Okay.
you're not married, single, or using donor embryo, fully donated embryo, you proceed under a subsection of our adoption statute, and it's called
Hmm.
a pre-planned adoption. Uh, so that being said, it's important that anyone considering surrogacy in Florida consult with an attorney licensed in Florida, because those two processes can differ depending on where you file your process, where you're filing in which county. But generally speaking, and where I handle everything, at the end of the day, the parents' process will be very similar. It requires some additional documentation at the very beginning of the contract stage if you're going under the
Sure.
pre-planned adoption. But there is a legal way to proceed for any type of intended parent in Florida.
Okay. Okay. So going on kind of, and forgive me for, not understanding it in the full legal spectrum, but I know
Yes,
like a lot of times, people will say like I know for me as a surrogate, people would ask me about the process and they would say, "Wait, so are the intended parents, adopting the baby?" And
right,
I would always say, "No, no, 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 no. This is their
right.
baby."
Yeah,
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about that under those
sure.
statutes and all that fun.
So our surrogacy statute, I mean, there's no reference to adoption. There's no ability for the surrogate to change her mind. There's no consents needed at birth. Under the pre-planned adoption, while it is within a subsection of our adoption statute, it's in
Uh-huh.
no way treated like what you'd think of as like a typical adoption. So also with the pre-planned adoption, there's no legal ability for the surrogate to change her mind unless it's her genetic child, which in the case of gestational surrogacy, which is what you and I handled together, won't
Not a thing.
happen. I mean, absent a breach of the contract where she had intercourse at a time she wasn't supposed to and got pregnant on her own. So under both statutes, the parents are not adopting their baby. The court process actually is called an affirmation of parental rights. Although under the
Gotcha.
pre-planned adoption, we are handling it within a subsection of the adoption. It's not what you think of as the traditional like birth mother scenario where you're waiting for after the birth to sign anything. You're not waiting to be discharged until the surrogate agrees that you can, take the baby home. At least where I handle everything in Broward County, which is where I am, and where I file all the court proceedings, regardless of where the surrogate's located in Florida. Everything I need signed from the surrogate is done before she's even pregnant. So the parent or the parents can be, rest assured that there's no discretion of the court or the surrogate to have to, give up any parental rights to confirm the parental rights of the parents.
Sure. So basically, when you hear the word adopt, like you said, it's that subsection. So don't freak out.
I
Don't
always
get
have
concerned.
parents. Exactly. I don't want to. I always explain it to the intended parents because I don't want them to be surprised or, taken aback if they ever see this. Look at the statute or when they see my pleadings, go, wait,
Sure.
what's that? So I always like to kind of explain it, but also rest assured that it is a clear path to parenthood for anybody, even under the pre-planned adoption, and there's no discretion of the court or the surrogate to finalize the parental rights of the parents. It's just kind of how we handle it here in Florida.
Sure, absolutely. It's, just that fun, like, hey, we'll stick this here.
Legal steps. Yeah. But
exactly.
yes. But like I said, it's no, it's not like what you think of with a traditional adoption where
Right.
you still have the same communication with the doctors and the surrogate. The contract's essentially identical. Like again, no revocation period or anything like that.
Sure. And that's just in certain situations of, if it's a donor sperm, donor egg, not
It would have
married,
to be
like
single parent, an unmarried couple, or a donor embryo. So
Gotcha.
That's what puts us into the pre-planned.
Okay. That makes a ton of sense. And I know is super helpful because like I said, when people see that word, there
Yes.
can sometimes be pause. But speaking of that, like I said, someone, there's kind of all of those some fun questions that come whenever, you're going through this process and you hear kind of those, myths and you think of, some fun Lifetime movie in Hollywood and, whatever. What would you say are maybe some of those like common myths that you've encountered, being in art law?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. It can be a very scary and overwhelming process.
Yeah.
And for most people, I mean, I know because it's like the first time most people ever have to deal with a lawyer. And so there's just it's a lot of new situations and creates a lot of fears and concerns. So, I mean, some of the myths, just questions that I get asked quite frequently is just parents are nervous if the surrogate can keep the baby. That's probably the top question that I get asked. And we just kind of addressed it is under Florida law. The answer is no. It would be akin to essentially kidnapping if the surrogate were to keep the baby in Florida. So the law, is very clear. It's not her child.
Yes.
And, what we do in Florida, and we're taking one huge step back, every state has different laws regarding surrogacy, which I know but it's just for the listeners. So the process to confirm the parental rights of the parent or the parents differs from state to state. Florida, no matter which way you're doing it, pre-planned or surrogacy statute, is a post-birth state. So we get a court order right after the baby's born. And that court order is what I would send to Vital Records to issue the birth certificate. That being said, I always also get a pre-birth order. It's not sent to Vital Records for the birth certificate, but it's immensely helpful to just make a very smooth process at the hospital. So
absolutely,
where I'm going with this is to alleviate the concerns of can the surrogate keep the baby is I always send the pre-birth order to you, the agency, and to the hospital. So it's really like a legal heads up that this is who the parent or the parents are going to be. This is the surrogate. So we just ensure that there's no issues or with access, the parents accessing the baby, being discharged, getting banded to the extent possible. So that really helps keep the process smooth.
Yeah.
Let's see. I mean, there's conceptions of like, this is only for the rich and famous, or women are just doing this to, save their figure, be able to drink, party hard. But like I talked about, at the beginning, the law in Florida requires a medical need. So it's a really rare circumstance where someone's coming to this process just for the heck of it. Like this is for most a last resort or like very end of the road or needed, like medically necessary to proceed. And as far as like this is just like for the rich and famous. I mean, of course it is an expensive process, but I represent so many people from so many different financial standpoints and walks of life.
Yeah.
And there are resources available to help offset the cost, but of
Yes.
course it's important like to speak with you guys at the agency to have a fair, rough budget, because you obviously
Hmm.
don't want to get into a process where it could put financial strain on anybody, which just makes the whole process more stressful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Specifically around the financial piece of it, I think one of the things that I'm so proud of our agency is, we are very upfront and transparent about this is how much the cost is. And I know you
That's
are very
great.
upfront about the this is going to be the cost of contracts. This is going to be the
Yep.
cost of PDO. This is, just all of those things and having that
I think it's really
upfront.
important to know. What I think is so cool about you guys, which I recently learned, is that you will allow parents to just kind of join your wait list without making a financial commitment, which I think is really
Yes.
interesting. So you can just kind of see what's out there without having to, because many agencies do require some funds down to start looking. So anything helps, and
Yes.
but I do think it's important that the parents know in advance how much like the budget is, but how much they're going to have to put into escrow.
Hmm.
Because I always find that when that's not discussed in advance and then they're told, oh, you have to put base comp for the surrogate plus, whatever it is, like they're like, wait, it's like hard to wrap your brain around it. So it's always helpful to know in advance kind of what those obligations will be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Are there
Yeah.
any other myths or are there any other kind of, encounters that you've had that are just so unique to the
Yeah.
seat that you sit in?
I mean, even just having gone through it personally, and I know a lot of parents
Yeah.
have these concerns, just will I connect to the baby and will I feel,
Mm.
like detached from the process? But I know having gone through it personally, when the baby arrives, it's just like this most amazing thing. And it all just is part of your journey, like the surrogacy portion of it, and just kind of their
Yeah.
story. And it's like an amazing, really, truly amazing thing. And I'm still in touch with my surrogate now, almost 11 years later.
Yeah.
So it's very cool. And what I think is really great, even though it's not a legal requirement in Florida, is that the parties undergo the psychological evaluation at the very, very beginning of the process before there's even a
Yes.
contract. And I think talking about these concerns about bonding, how do you tell your child how they're conceived and born? Like, I think all that just really helps in the mental prep, um,
Hmm.
so that you feel connected. And a great thing about surrogacy and how this differs from a true traditional adoption is that the parent or the parents have the ability to really be involved in the process, to speak to the doctors, to get, understand what the medical records are saying, to speak to their surrogate, which you really can't do in a traditional adoption. So
Hmm.
that really helps feel like connected. Like you'll get to, if you can, make it to appointments, and hopefully be at the delivery, and
Yeah.
so you really feel super involved in the process.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
those are some of the
And
big
it's
tickets.
so those are the big ones. And it's so fun that, your journey now, almost 11 years later, and you still get to be part of this, process and have this fun
Yeah,
celebration of baby's born.
I
Yay.
know. It's so nice. It's so exciting. And it's just truly is a journey. Like you hear that word a lot in this
Oh,
in this what we do.
but it's the
But
only
it's
descriptor. It really
yeah.
is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it just really is. There's different stages of it, and you kind of look back where you start, and it's just wow, like how far you can come in this process. It's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. What
Yeah.
would you say are maybe just, some of your, like one of your favorite things about doing what you do?
Yeah. I mean, the obvious is helping people have a
Absolutely.
family. I mean, just
Yeah.
getting the baby pictures at the end of the
Oh,
day
yes.
is just like the most amazing thing, because it's like this real tangible thing that I helped, like a tiny sliver in that process.
Yeah.
So from the IP side, the IP meaning intended parent, that's obviously a really joyous component of what I do. And then I love representing surrogates too. And
Hmm.
while I'm in Florida, there's not really much to do at the birth stage because it's typically handled by the intended parent's attorney. That
Right.
depends on the state. Just getting them through the contract where, like I said, it might be someone's first time ever dealing with a lawyer, reading a 70-page agreement,
Sure.
just getting them from like just that feeling of like, whoa, what is all this, to feeling confident and comfortable and understanding. That's also really a great process where we kind of, I feel like they're like on their way and like set with a good understanding of what their, what their job is like from a legal standpoint.
Yeah. It's so easy to talk about all of the fun and the good and the exciting part of the whole process, but obviously,
Yeah.
all of this has some bumps along the way sometimes. And, I know unfortunately sometimes you have to be a part of that. What would you say are maybe kind of some of the harder parts of the
Yeah.
job that you have?
I mean, sometimes the process doesn't work, and that's obviously very hard for everybody involved. I will never lose sight of how hard it is to not have a successful pregnancy, just
Mm-hmm.
even from my own experience of having like multiple miscarriages. And
Mm-hmm.
that's just hard. And it's hard emotionally. It's hard financially because
Yeah.
parents many times have to start over. So I always try to be mindful of that. So if we ever have to do a new agreement, I always try to be mindful to help with cost on that because it does really impact having to start over. Um, so that's tough. And then from that obvious point of just like it not working, where I really do sympathize with everybody involved, including the surrogate. I mean, surrogates are excited for this, and it's just a disappointment to how when it doesn't work. And
Yeah.
obviously it's no one's fault. It's just it's a tough situation. It's just sometimes hard to get pregnant.
Yeah.
And I'd say another hard part is seeing when, on rare circumstances, when the relationship kind of breaks down between the
Mm-hmm.
parties.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mentioned at the very beginning of the show is just communication is such an important part of it. And
Yes.
I find that most issues really come down to just some form of miscommunication between the parties, either the parents not communicating enough, communicating too much, the surrogate's not communicating enough. So I think what's great when the agency is involved is kind of, you can't know how the relationship will be to a T because things evolve, but just kind of getting a sense of where the relationship is kind of expected to be. So, because not every match is like, everyone has different expectations. There's some parents that make it a little more clinical, a little more business-like, and that wouldn't be
Sure.
a good match for a surrogate who wants to be super communicative and involved. And it can cause resentment, which just kind of like deteriorates as the process goes along. So
Absolutely.
that's hard to see. And it's also tough from a legal perspective when a surrogate is pregnant and going through this process, because this is not a real estate transaction. You just can't sue.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is a person carrying a child. It's
Yeah.
very delicate. And a lot of people come at this just, not a lot, but people can sometimes look at it like more, if it's too transactional, like that gets a little tricky because it's,
Mm-hmm.
while it is a contract and it's enforceable, there's like steps to take and think about before going full on like demand letters and all this stuff, which again is a rare thing and not the norm. But I've been doing this for a long time, so I've seen it a lot.
Yeah.
So it's always helpful with a great agency involved to kind of be the moderator and take a lot off the parties to have to like when we're working with your agency, the parents and the surrogate aren't talking directly about money, which is
Right.
helpful because like
Yeah.
that can get like a little tough and tricky. And so whatever like little steps like that, just to help it stay smooth and communicate smoothly, like just is so helpful for the whole
Yeah.
process.
Yes. Yes. Well, and you're so
So
right. It's that, I mean, yes, at the end of the day, there is a contract. There is black and white paper. There is no gray.
right.
It is a contract, but it is a contract with people. And
Right.
people are, and there are nuances and it's not just, oh,
Right.
my neighbor is now using my fence and
Yes.
whatever. And, all of
Yes.
that.
There's definitely like, no pun or pun intended, baby steps to take if there is an issue before you just go full on, like bring in the lawyers. And I actually encourage that. Like, I don't want to be involved in litigation or demand letters. Like have the agency help moderate, maybe bring in the psychologist to discuss, have something moderated. And many times just kind of patching over like some communication issues goes a really, really long way in the process.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
I do. I always say, as an agency and as a coordinator, like I want you guys to stay in Happy Lala Babyland. Like nobody
Yes.
needs to get up in arms about, I don't know, the amount of caffeine intake or,
Right.
just whatever it may be. Like, just
Yeah.
talk to me.
It's
Tell me what's up. Tell me all of the things. And it is great to have that third party, as part of
absolutely
that process because, when you don't necessarily have an agency involved, then I think you're right. A
falls a
lot of
lot on the parties.
it
Yeah.
does, and a
It
lot of
helps.
miscommunication can happen.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So that can be like a stickier situation, but many times it can be smoothed over. I mean, in my all my years of practice, knock on wood, I've never had anything be litigated. This is
Mm,
not like what you see in the movies. I mean, of course, anything can happen. I don't want to steer
sure,
anybody wrong, but
sure.
that's kind of like the myth that this is like a running off with the baby, and the things that you read about maybe in like the news or whatever. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I know we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but is there anything, just obviously sitting in, just from your perspective of being an intended parent and then, as an art attorney, is there anything that you wish that intended parents or gestational carriers would know prior to, coming to you, prior to that contract phase or as part of the contract phase?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it just my suggestion is to stick with the guidelines and don't cut corners. Like so for example, and
Mm,
I know that your agency wouldn't allow that, but for example, Florida doesn't require two lawyers in the process for the contract, but it's such a best practice and
yeah.
so important. And it's not as common with an agency, but like self matches, if you see like sisters carrying things like that, like they go, oh, I don't need a lawyer, it's my sister. Or,
Hmm.
even in this case, like if someone feels comfortable just signing off, it's just a corner not to cut.
Yeah.
Um, so I think just understanding that the contract really is an important step, not to be brushed off or, something that requires focus because you don't want to be surprised down the road because it addresses so many different things. So I think just
Hmm.
going into it, knowing like embrace like the help with the lawyer. It's like a team
Yes.
effort here. Um, and that it be handled by experienced reproductive attorneys. It shouldn't be your real estate lawyer friend who can handle it for
Yes.
you. Those are nightmare situations, which I actually won't even take the case on opposite of that because it's too important to just
Hmm.
not be represented by someone experienced in this area. They just, I'm sure they're very smart people, but they just don't know what to look for
Right.
and how to counsel. So that is an important thing to think about. And I think it's important for everybody to understand. I know that your agency kind of counsels everybody when they're being matched, but just to kind of make sure you feel comfortable with who you're choosing as your surrogate. As far as like seeing eye to eye on a lot of the big topics, like I know it's hard to think about or even talk about like abortion and selective reduction and
Absolutely.
even like, vaccination preferences, because a parent can't force this is not just in Florida, this is really anywhere you're doing this. Like you can't force a surrogate to do or not do something pertaining to her body. The contract might have remedies if she goes against what she's committed to do, but a judge will never make her have an abortion or make her do an embryo transfer. Like you just can't force somebody, it's their
Right.
body. Um, so I think that just going into it's important for an intended parent to really think about what is important to them and make sure they
Hmm.
match accordingly. And that'll just help the process be very smooth too, because they're not forcing a round peg into a square hole or whatever the expression is. Like they're working with somebody that's going to align as much as possible. And I know parents want to move forward like yesterday, but not to just choose someone if there's like a sticking point like that they just don't feel comfortable with.
Hmm.
It wouldn't be the right match because you don't want to worry that if God forbid something comes up where you would ever want the right to abort, the surrogate wouldn't do it and make her feel pressured to do something she's not comfortable doing. Um,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I
yeah.
mean, and
So
that's way prior to contracts that all of that needs to be
Yeah,
taken into
that's
account, which only sets
as
you
it
up for
should,
success.
because
Yeah.
that could make a contract fall apart if we get to that section and the parties just don't align. So it's
Mm-hmm.
so important in the matching process that a parent and surrogate discuss this at the beginning to see like what situations would a surrogate feel comfortable terminating a pregnancy or reducing a pregnancy. Um, and like I said, there's other things like during COVID, it was just a huge issue of whether someone would get vaccinated or not.
Sure.
And where a surrogate worked, like if a parent was super nervous and their surrogate worked at a grocery store, whatever it was, like maybe that's not the right match because you're not going to change what she's doing. That's her
Right.
life. And so you have to feel comfortable with your match. And then the surrogate has to feel comfortable with the parent's match, obviously, too. So
Yeah.
it
Well,
goes both ways.
there has to be equal trust. There has to be equal
Right.
trust. Otherwise, you're just holding your breath for, over a year, and
Right.
that's not comfortable for anybody.
Absolutely. So those are things to think about just kind of as you lead up to legal, just to make sure you see eye to eye. You're not forcing anything just to get going. And to understand, like, you have to come to this process with some sensitivity. We can't contract things that are unreasonable for a surrogate. There has to be protections for her too. It has to be
Mm-hmm.
fair. Like, we have to, it's important to like defer to medical opinions and have the parents understand like they can't micromanage her pregnancy or her health or safety issues. So it's just a different concept to kind of get used to, because it's just like a new concept for most people. And
Yeah.
you have to be sensitive to both sides, protecting the parents and the parental rights, and understanding that the other side is that the surrogate is, a woman that's doing this to her body, and that you have to make sure she's protected as well. So it's certainly interesting balance.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, again, it's the people in the black and white process, and it's figuring out how to make
Yeah,
all of that fit, which is why it's so important to work with someone who
yeah.
is, just part or
You see,
professional in this process, and you've seen it and things to look out for. And
right. I mean, it goes even to our statute. Like our law in Florida says that the surrogate has, it's called the sole source and consent with respect to her body.
mm,
So the parents have to always kind of have that as the overarching principle that these decisions are ultimately hers to make. And
yeah.
everything else, I mean, it's coming down to, in a way, like you're trusting her and she's trusting the parents. So you really have to, even though, like we said, there's a contract and it could be enforced. So you are having to allow her to know that, trust that she's going to make the best decisions with the guidance of her doctors.
Well, I mean, it is. It's going back to, just it truly is that big trust factor. And, there's so many steps along the way before you get to that contract phase to build that trust and to believe trust in
Exactly.
the
And
other
I think the more
party.
it's
And
discussed, it really helps.
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. What would you say, maybe to day one, Marla? What do you wish you kind of, knew then that you know now as part of this process, whether your personal or one
Yeah.
or just you as an attorney? What would kind of be that day one
Yeah.
advice you'd give her?
Interesting question. I mean, from a personal perspective, I'd say when I was going through my infertility process, I never thought that I would get to surrogacy. Like you start
Mm,
at the beginning with like Clomid or IUI, and you're like,
sure.
I'll never need IVF. And then there you are at IVF.
Sure.
And then you're like, oh, I'll never need to work with this will work. I'll never need surrogacy. And there I was with surrogacy. So I think it's just like trying not to like stay open minded and kind of embrace these options versus resisting it. It's hard. I mean, it was a hard decision. It was a little harder for me than for my husband because for the woman, you're kind of giving up certain things that you always kind of envisioned doing. So I think to the best extent possible that you just kind of stay open to these options. Because at the end of the day, I mean, now that I've been through it, I'm just so grateful that this was an option. And,
Mm-hmm.
I know being open if you need an egg donor or, sperm donor, like to the best extent possible. And like, obviously financially it makes sense. Like, don't give up. There's like options. available. So I'd hate for parents to think there's just like one path and that's it. Like, be open.
Yeah.
Because that was something I had to learn over time. And then professionally, I think what's interesting, and I see it from the perspective since I work at a large firm, is there's just so many different legal aspects that come into this. And so,
Sure.
I handle the legal agreement and the parentage process, but I have an attorney at my firm that helps with estate planning. I always recommend my
Mhm.
clients have a will, a guardian appointed. God forbid what happens if a parent or the parents die or become incapacitated. The surrogate's not going to be the parent of the child.
No,
So it's
we
always
have
important.
definitely established that there will be no
Yes,
baby going
yes,
home with a surrogate.
yes. And I've unfortunately had intended parents pass away while their surrogate is pregnant. I've had it happen twice.
Oh gosh.
And it's critical that parents have an estate plan. And I always bring this up at the very beginning. And it's quite honestly just another part that like a lot of parents haven't thought about because there's just so
Yeah.
much to consider. Um, so estate planning is an important thing. I refer to my firm also for immigration work. Intended parents, as you know, can be from all over the world, and
Absolutely.
they have to make sure they have the legal ability to travel here and stay here for enough time to allow for whatever the baby might need to, stay in the hospital. So
Sure.
understanding their legal ability to travel and stay here. During COVID, my immigration department helped with parents being able to leave here when
Sure.
borders shut down and it was very difficult to get passports. My firm has a litigation department. Hopefully it's something we never need, but
Yes,
there's
we prefer
just
to
so
not do
many. Yeah.
that.
But it's there. And it's just interesting to kind of think about from a professional standpoint, just how much goes into this process. And,
Yeah.
but if you take it step by step, it comes together. And for me, the hardest stage of the whole process was like the day I decided to proceed with surrogacy. You
Mm,
feel kind of like, whoa, where do I start? But if you kind of take a deep breath and like do it little bit by little bit, it really does come together and it narrows as you proceed. But it can feel very overwhelming, and that's okay, and that's like a normal feel for
yeah.
it. But with especially if you can work with your agency, like that helps immensely to help kind of guide a parent and where to go, where to start, and when to do what. So just kind of like taking a deep breath and like proceeding step by step.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yes, exactly. Breaking it down little by little. Even,
Yeah, because it can
just
feel overwhelming.
it can. It can feel very overwhelming. And
Yeah.
yes, but ultimately that big picture has those small puzzle pieces. And so you can
Yes,
go step by step,
absolutely.
whether it's, that contract phase and thinking about, okay, now we've got to talk about estate planning and now we've got to talk about possibly immigration. And now we got just all of those things. If you just
Right.
break it down step by step, which is why you build this team and have an agency and an art attorney specifically. And,
Right.
all of those things for sure.
Yeah. And it's
Yeah.
so great that I know within your agency you have former surrogates, like multiple former surrogates that
Yes, we
can
do.
help. Yes. To help both from the intended parent side and the surrogate side, to offer
Yeah.
that support, to share stories and be there to kind of help guide through that process is really, really helpful.
Yeah. Well, again, that firsthand knowledge, just similar to you and your
Yeah.
own firsthand knowledge, it helps a lot. It helps a lot to
Yeah,
talk to people who've been
yes,
through
as
that.
you know, for sure, it's a gift to give back after having, and you've given the gift as a surrogate. Um, and so yeah, I mean, I have such a wonderful experience working with your team, and
Oh,
it's
thank you,
just
Marla.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
just really nice, and I know anybody that's with you is in very good hands.
Oh, that is so nice.
Yeah,
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I mean,
absolutely.
we definitely, we love what we do for sure. And
You can tell.
we love working with you.
Yeah, and to the
Um,
extent anybody ever has questions, they're welcome to reach out to me. I do offer complimentary consultations. A lot of times people are just exploring this as an option. I'm happy to
Absolutely.
provide information. Even if you're not ready to proceed at that time, I'll hear from parents a year or 2 years later after they first reached out. You never know when someone's ready to do this or come back to it or need it for a second child or so I'm happy to help to whatever extent I can.
Yeah, and we'll have all of that information in our show notes on how people
Great.
can get a hold of you. But
Wonderful.
before I let you go, I have one final question
Okay.
for anyone. And I know you've seen me sipping on it this whole time, but for anyone who knows me, they know that I have a very codependent relationship with coffee.
Oh,
And so I always yep, cheers, ma'am.
yes.
And so I always like to ask, what filled your cup today? Literally or figuratively, what was the thing that
Yes.
has filled your cup?
Well, literally, it is the Nespresso pod. There's a new
Mm.
one that's infused with vitamin D in it, and it's so
Oh,
delicious.
how very healthy.
Yes, I don't know what it's called, and I use full fat milk, and this is the actually interesting story. This is pottery that my mom made, and
Oh, that's beautiful.
she made it during my infertility journey. So all of it is fertility. Like this is like the embryo,
Oh
and this
my
is my husband and
gosh.
I, and all of it's kind of like dreaming about the babies, which are all represented by little birds. So all of
Oh.
so I didn't plan that. Just all my mugs are my mom's fertility pottery.
I love that. Okay, so for the listener, it is a white cup and it has just this gorgeous, like, kind of tan outlines and like, oh my gosh, it's beautiful. It's
Thank
absolutely
you.
beautiful. She's so
Yeah.
talented.
Thank you. Yeah, I really love it. And she made me platters. Like, I think she was channeling her stress with everything into
Yeah.
her pottery.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah. And it's like, it touches so many people, like obviously my husband and I, but my mom and,
Yeah.
my sister and everyone gets vested in the process. So
That's beautiful.
yeah, very cool question. What was in your cup?
Oh, I always kind of go with my go-to, like Seattle's best drip coffee. But then
Okay,
of
nice.
course, 'tis the season, and so naturally I have some pumpkin spice
Nice.
creamer in there. So yeah, we're
Love,
we're
very
we're
festive.
living fall.
It's hard for me to understand fall in Florida right now where it's still 90 degrees, but I'll
Well,
pretend we're in fall
I don't
in your in
understand it
Texas.
either. Exactly. I'm in Texas, so I
It creeps.
rebel against the heat by like
Yeah.
forcing fall in other ways.
Yes. It will be chilly no matter what.
No matter what, no matter what.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Well, Marla, I so appreciate you just giving your time and talking about, just this passion that we share and, just giving all
Absolutely.
of the professional advice that you have as well as personal. And,
Thank
I know we've
you
said it so many times already, but we love working with you. And I love
so
that
much.
we get to work together to create these happy families and have those fun baby pictures at the end.
Yes, thank you for having me on the show. It's such a pleasure and so great to finally get to see you and speak to you. And
Yes.
it was a lot of fun, and I'm so happy to share. And thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Me, You, and Who. We appreciate your time and hope you enjoyed our discussion today. As we wrap, we would like to remind you of some of the ways that you can stay connected with us and be part of the Me, You, and Who podcast community. Firstly, if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode and can stay up to date with our latest content. But that's not all. We also have an exciting YouTube channel where we share some bonus content, behind the scenes glimpses, and video versions of our episodes. Head over to YouTube and hit that subscribe button there as well. And don't forget to click the notification bell so you'll be the first to know when the new episodes go live. And for more exclusive updates, engaging discussions, and a chance to connect with fellow listeners. Be sure to follow us on our social media accounts. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Create a Happy Family. If you're interested in finding out more about creating a happy family, please visit us at www.createahappyfamily.com. Thank you again for being part of the Me, You, and Who community. Your support means the world to us. I can't wait for you to join us next time as we continue to share stories and journeys of creating happy families.